So, hey guys, we're going to go ahead and get started, but in a sort of unique-ish way. Come on in. So, so I've got bad news and I've got worse news. So let's start with the bad news. The bad news is Wendy's got COVID. Which means Steve is at home taking care of her and getting COVID. And so the worst news is I'm teaching. And he's like, you can throw something together. I said I could, except for the fact I'm doing a mom's event on Friday and I'm doing the men's event on Saturday. And I have nothing, blah, blah, blah.
So Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Well, I'm just rolling. I mean, I got momentum, but I got no subject. So I'm like, for your consideration, 3 things I've done in the past. I don't care which one you pick, because I'm not any more prepared for any one of them over another. So,
let's just go for breakfast.
You have your choice. We can do The Wedding at Cana, which I would call, the title of that one's called Surprisingly Unfamiliar. Main course, one of my favorites, the story of Judah and Tamar, why you should not skip any chapters. And then dessert, the most depressing psalm, and again, choir director's only effort. Psalm 88.
Oh, Psalm 88.
Yeah, exactly. I threw that one in there for you, brother.
There's no hope in that one.
Yeah, there is no hope in this one, that is for sure. So it's like asking for dessert and getting apple caramel cheese crunch cake. It's like, hey, what's the matter?
It's quite yummy.
So talk amongst yourselves. Don't ask me for which one my favorite one is.
You already told us.
So we know what you want to do.
I don't honestly. I like them all. So that's the say. I picked something familiar. So
Let's do the menu.
we're not doing that.
3-course.
There's no time for it. Well, if we're gonna do Jude and Tamar, we gotta get going. So.
Let's go get them.
All right. So open your Bibles to Genesis. And let's jump in here to Judah and Tamar. All right, so let's start with this question, which is so much fun because I start with a question. I already know Alex's answer to the first question. What's your favorite R-rated movie? Hey, you're wondering why? I mean, this is the point.
What's my answer to this question?
Batman.
It's not R-rated.
It's not.
PG-13.
Is it really? How's that movie PG-13?
Is it the passion?
The Passion of the
Passion of
Christ.
Christ would be a great answer.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Goodfellas.
Die Hard. Great Christmas movie.
Yeah.
The Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Not a bad one. Others?
The Departed.
Huh?
The Departed.
The Departed? I've never seen that. Is it a horror movie? Sounds like it.
It's got, it's a Scorsese film, but it's got Jack Nicholson, Matt Damon, Leonardo DiCaprio, Mark Wahlberg. It's
Really?
Like, yeah.
Wow.
Is it like Psalm 88?
Basically.
They have to watch that. So another one, when my answer to this one, probably one of my favorite R-rated movies is My Cousin Vinny.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Fred Gwynn is awesome in it. Like, Utes. What's a Ute?
You blend.
Oh, yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is. You may have only watched it on like the Clean Flicks version of it, because it cleans up really easy. You just change all the language in it. So anyway, now, second question. Which of Jacob's 12 sons is most like Christ?
Judah.
Why do you say Judah? He's a scumbag. Which one do we always hear about?
Joseph.
Joseph. Why are we always beat over the head with Joseph?
He saved the whole family.
He saves the whole family, right? Is he obedient or disobedient?
Yes.
He's obedient, right? Is he his father's favorite? Like Jesus would be his father's favorite? Right? So again, he gets caught in a bad sexual situation. Does he fall to temptation or? No, he runs, right? Does he whine and complain in jail when he's falsely accused? Huh?
Not that we see.
Not that we hear about, right? Clearly, he's a great kid, right? So why are these two questions related? That's the point of today's list. By the way, the top-rated R-rated movie of all time? I'm surprised nobody said this.
The Godfather.
It's The Godfather. Exactly right. Schindler's List also makes the top 10. So Genesis is a pretty simple book. Again, the blessings and cursings. It's a fall and then this starting to work our way out of the fall. So creation, fall, Noah, Babel, everything's just this constant moving in the wrong direction. And then God basically intervenes and says, well, I'm going to pick some guy, Abram, and we're going to start to change the trajectory of this thing. And then we see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so where again, most of this deals with lots and lots of centuries and lots of people. At the end of the book, it really deals with essentially 5 people: Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Esau, and Jacob. And the natural outline of Genesis is super important. If you miss the outline, you miss the point of the book, honestly. And so what happens is there's this term, Toledot, I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's how West Texas people pronounce it, apparently. Toledot. Anyway,
Toledot.
Good eye. So it starts right here at the beginning. You go through the 7 days of creation, everything is perfect and at rest, and then it goes, this is what became of the heavens and the earth. And so various translations will sit there and say, these are the records of the generations, blah, blah, blah. But it's just generally what became of this person. And so you've got Adam, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Obviously, then you get Shem, Terah, Abraham's father. So what became of Terah? It's all about Abraham. What became of Ishmael? What became of Isaac? It's all about Jacob and Esau. What became of Esau? It's all about Edom. What became of Jacob is where we pick up the story. So the problem, in my mind, of Genesis is basically every pastor kind of skips to the end and, of course, picks on Joseph, right? And so, from my perspective, the implication is always, if you just measured up to Joseph's standard, right, everything would be good, right? You'd be a better person, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I hate to tell you, but if I'm sold into slavery by my brothers and a hot lady comes to me and I have a chance to sort of, move up from this whole slavery gig, I'm not probably fleeing, right? At some level, that's just, I'm going to fail this test, right? And I'm not going to go to jail for this in the next scene. Just kind of thinking through this, right? You guys can sit there and be self-righteous, but I'm like looking at this going, this is a lost cause for me at this moment in time, right? So Joseph, of course, grates on his brothers too, right? And this is where we pick up the story, right? When they saw him from a distance in verse 37, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. And they said to one another, well, here comes this dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we'll say, a wild beast devoured him. Then let's see what will become of his dreams. Joseph's obedience does not guarantee blessings. This is one of we get this. We've covered this so many times in this class where we talk about the chapters in Deuteronomy that basically sit there and say, if you obey, you will blah 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 blah, right? And if you disobey, blah 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 blah, right? Yet obedience, and again, that mindset gets into certainly the first century Jewish population, because you can tell if somebody is righteous and blessed by God by looking at what? Their material possessions, right? And of course, that's not exactly the case, right? Now, the brothers are not seeking to rechannel the blessing. This is the prior conflict, Esau and Jacob, right? Jacob's mom in particular is making sure that her son, the one that she loves, is going to get the blessing. And there's this battle between, which blessing, the dad, giving the blessing out. In this case, they don't really care. They're clueless as to the fact that this is massively important.
You would think it'd go to the firstborn then.
You would think it would go to Reuben,
Yeah.
right? Exactly. Reuben comes into the story.
Sure does.
Sure does.
Saves his life.
Yes, you can say that. Reuben's more interested in his own skin than his brother's, but that's okay. So, how evil are these people? Well, they sit down and have a meal, understand in this culture, and you see this with Abraham and his visitors, right? That is the ultimate expression of hospitality, right? And so their brother is over in the pit, right? Screaming, yelling, crying, moaning, whatever you would be doing in the pit. And what are they doing?
And lunch.
Having lunch. Just think about us having lunch after second service, wherever we go today, and one of us is stuck underneath a car, and the rest of us are just saying, well, I wonder if we can get another ice cream cone from Jason's. Judah says to his brothers, what profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Well, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, not lay our hands on him. He is our brother after all, our own flesh. What a scumbag, right? I mean, it is just pure evil, right? Let's make some money on the deal. So, of course, then they do what? They take Joseph's tunic, slaughter the male goat, dip the tunic in blood, send the varied colored tunic on to their father and say, hey, we found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not. Not our brother's, your son's deal, right? And of course, this use of examine and recognize is a phrase that is going to be used only in this section, chapter 37:2 to the end of the book is the only time that those couplets are used, because again, they have very important elements to it. Well, of course, as we know the story, Jacob is grieved to the point of inconsolability. The blessing does not pass to one of the other brothers. Of course, there are 12 sons. Only 5 get speaking points. To Bob's point, one of them happens to be Reuben. Simeon and Levi get 2 other brief mentions. Judah and Joseph are the last ones. Only one other brother is mentioned outside of the list as opposed to just frankly being born, and that is the dude Benjamin, right? So, again, when we think about all of this stuff, right, I think probably kind of the most important part of this is sort of this, right? At the end of the day, they're all going to be part of a nation, and a great multitude of people promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But one of them carries the seed of the blessing of the seed from Genesis chapter 3. And that's been the point all along, is we've been tracing one specific line until we get to Noah. And then 3 sons, but it's Shem. There's no controversy about that. Then it's another 10 generations right to Abram. Abraham has basically 1 son of promise. That's pretty easy. Jacob wins out over his battle with Esau. Everything's good. It's not too hard to pick between 2 kids. But 12 amongst 4 women, a bit more difficult, right? So, the problem, this is in my mind, this is the whole reason for Genesis chapter 36 into 37:1, the story of what became of Esau. If this is going to be a nation that God is blessing the world through, the problem is he's got 12 people to choose from, and these people can't have a meal together without somebody dying. Right? You thought your Thanksgiving meals were difficult? How does he pick one, right? So, let's run through the list. Reuben, starting with number 1, right? Were you the oldest in your family too?
Yes.
Me too. Exactly. And the oldest suffers greatly in Genesis, right? I mean, it's not good to be number 1.
The babies are back
The babies
here.
are all back here going, woohoo, babies rule. Anyway, Reuben, who you would assume, right, would get it, but of course no, he's a knucklehead. At the end, as Jacob is handing out his blessings, he goes, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power, uncontrolled as water. You shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, you defiled it, you went up to my couch. Basically, had affairs with his, not his mom, but one of his stepmoms, mother-in-law, something like that, right? Simeon and Levi, numbers 2 and 3, also disqualified themselves. You have this weird little story of Shechem, where again, they have one sister who's named, she is raped, and their solution to the problem is to say, hey, we can make a marriage of this deal, but first things first, you all need to be circumcised. That kind of puts the army in a disadvantage. You've just been recently circumcised, and they wipe everybody out. And again, he points this out in chapter 49. So, Jacob is not a great nation because, again, his sons display the same evil that Cain failed to master all the way back in Genesis chapter 4, right? Genesis has already shown that God can bless a nation, any man, into a great nation. Ishmael and Esau are examples 1 and 2 of this, right? So that is not the question. The question is what? Character. Okay? So God has to act as he's always acted in the past to basically bring about his program of blessing. And we get this interrupted narrative. So just follow the verses that kind of come around 38 and 31. So you get 37, 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him off to Egypt, to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. I mean, it's practically a chiasm. I mean, just as you come in is how you go out. What's in the middle? Chapter 38. So let's start reading chapter 38. Everybody just take a verse, start at the beginning. We'll start at the beginning and go boop, 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 all through the room. 38, chapter 1.
It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her. And she conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Er. She conceived again and bore a son, and she called him Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezed when she bore him.
Okay, stop right there. So we got a situation here with what? Judah has how many boys?
3.
3. What's the name of his wife?
Er.
His name is
No,
what?
I'm sorry, Shelah.
No. Read it.
Hira.
Yep. Nope, that's not it either. Keep looking. No.
It's the daughter of Shua.
Tamar.
It's the daughter of Shua.
That's right.
And it's we get place names and the daughter of Shua. This woman doesn't even get a name in the book. All right. Again, one of the big things that was an issue with Esau and Jacob was Esau married what? Canaanite women. Exactly right. So somebody read the next paragraph for us, sir. Since we're going paragraph by paragraph now. Verse 6 through 10.
Judah got a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Now Er, Judah's firstborn, was evil in the Lord's sight, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife, perform your duty as your brother-in-law, and produce offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he released the semen in the ground so that he would not produce offspring for his brother. What he did was evil in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. Stop
right there. Again, not good, right? This is why it's R-rated, right? So this is why you never hear this in church. Now again, the verb tense here is imperfect. It should be translated whenever. This is a persistent practice. Onan's just using her for his what? Sexual pleasure. No intention of honoring. And again, you can't sit there and say this is levirate marriage because what hasn't been written yet? The law. Perfect. Go on. Next chapter. Next one.
Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "I am a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought he might die too, like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house.
All right, wonderful. So why doesn't Judah give him the third son off to this woman?
Because he didn't want you to die.
Yeah. Now again, you could be just superstitious, right? If that's the case, basically demonstrates he's what? He has a clue about his character of his sons, right? And again, some would sit there and say, well, Selah's immaturity refers to his spiritual state, right? Probably not. Just probably more a function of age than anything else, right? So he's just physically immature.
Thomas, what was your point about how it's not, what'd you say, live-right marriage or something?
Levirate marriage. So there in Deuteronomy, because again, the tribe is more important than the name of the family was then right after the tribe, that if your brother died, then you raised up heirs to the head of the family. And so a brother would be given to another. And that whole concept is what leads them to Ruth and Boaz. Boaz is the kinsman redeemer that falls underneath that idea of levirate marriage.
So you're saying this has no connection to that?
Not yet, because there is no law.
Right, there's no law.
Okay.
That
Now-
could have been Middle Eastern practice.
Yeah, it could have been a lot of different things with it. But more importantly, one of the concepts though is that when we see the laws in Deuteronomy, we find their basis here in Genesis. So this would be proto-law from that perspective. Okay? No requirement, but the expectation. Okay? Good question. All right. So 12 through 15.
In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died.
Still miss not appearing in this film, right?
Yeah. I was like, why is he laughing? When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira, the Adulamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah, or whatever his name is, was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face.
All right. Somebody go on down through 18.
And he turned unto her by the way and said, Go to, I pray thee, let me come unto thee. For he knew that she was the daughter-in-law.
She did not.
Oh, he did not.
Yeah, that's important.
Let me skip the word.
That knot's right up there with thou shalt not commit adultery.
And she said, Oh, what wilt thou give me, and thou mayest come unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, Wilt thou give me a pledge until thou send it? And he said, What pledge shall I give you? And she said, Thy signet, and thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thine hand. And he gave it to her, and came into her, and she conceived by him.
Yeah, so stop right there. So she asks for what? What is she asking for in this time period?
His ID.
Yeah, I want your driver's license and your
Passport.
car keys. Right? Or your wallet, if you, depending on how you want to go and look at it, right?
Sometimes those signets also kind of carry their authority too, didn't they?
That's right. Exactly right. So you could sit there and say the authority to transact. So again, whether you want to sit there and say it's your identity and your authority kind of combined, right? But it's a big deal, right, to hand this stuff over. And
What would a seal be? Like his ring?
yeah, signet ring. So something like that you would seal something in wax or something along those lines. So it's a long practice.
I want that back.
Yep, I'd want that back too. Now, what's shocking about the conclusion of this whole shebang?
That he went along with it?
No, because he's an idiot.
Oh, fair enough.
So don't overestimate Judah's morality here.
She got pregnant,
She got pregnant.
but none of the other guys could get her pregnant.
Thank you very much, Bob. This woman has been having sex for a long time, and nothing's happened. She sleeps with her father-in-law exactly how many times?
Once.
Wow, and she's pregnant. How about that? She got up, left, removed her veil, put on her widow's clothes. Then when Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite in order to get back the items he left with the woman, he couldn't find her. He asked the men of the place, where's the cult prostitute was beside the road at the name? There has been no cult prostitute here, they answered. So the Adulamite returned to Judah and said, I couldn't find her. Furthermore, the men of the place said, there's been no cult prostitute here. Stop right there. Is that what she purported herself to be?
No.
No, not at all. She just puts herself forward as a what? Just a prostitute. Again, go back to the Corinthians, right? There's a sexual element to worship, which you could, I guess, sort of justify, right? But Judah's not even that clever. He's just like, I'm not in it for anything other than just what? The physical gratification. So we pick up there from 23 and go on down to, say, 24, just for those couple verses. 23 and 24.
And Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. About
He's a
3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out, and let her be burned.
Amen.
Yeah, so where's the indignation, Stacy? Right? Bring her out, Judah said. Let her be burned to death, right? Because why?
Because obviously, she was immoral.
She's immoral,
Yeah.
right? She's a prostitute.
But not the-
Who would he want somebody like that in his life and his family?
It kind of feels like he's looking for an excuse to just get rid of her. 'Cause
He has no idea.
But I mean, she's been hanging around in his house for so long. He's not going to marry his son to her.
Exactly. And she's a black widow, right? I mean, everybody he's ever sent her way has died. By the way, can he have any more sons with his wife?
Yeah.
Why not?
She's dead.
Because she's dead. Right? Exactly. Very good point. Excellent. Moving on, right? So, 25. Somebody read 25 for us.
As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are.
Exactly. Examine them. What was the word that the brothers said to their dad?
Example.
How about that? Do you recognize these things? Do you think Judah's ears are burning? Beyond the fact that he's like, oh crap, this is my stuff. Right? He should be hearing what?
His own voice.
His own voice. Exactly. Exactly right. Now, go on down to 26. So we read that.
Thomas, it's interesting that the pattern of lying and deception is generational. Started with
Jacob.
Jacob.
Well, Rebecca. Go back to Abraham. Screw that, right? That's not my wife. She's my cute sister. 26.
So Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not have relations with her again.
All right, great. This is the climax of the story, or should be, right? Judah's verdict is the normative viewpoint of the story, right? And instead of the author basically interpreting it for us, he puts it in the mouth of his character, okay? Now, what is he sitting there saying? Is she righteous because she was a prostitute?
No,
Why is she righteous?
because she held to the standard of the day. She was waiting to be married to Shelah.
That's right. She understands her role, and she's taking actions consistent with that role. Who's at fault here?
Judah.
Judah completely, right? Now what's interesting is, of course, Judah does what? He owns up to it in a big sort of a way, right? But Judah's not done. He needs a little bit more encouragement. Somebody read for us 27 to the end.
When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb, and as she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife took it and tied a scarlet thread around it, announcing, this one came out first. But then he pulled his hand back, and out came his brother, and she said, what a breakout you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread tied to his hand, came out, and he was named Sarah.
Okay, I'm sorry. How many of you were in the birth room when your wife had a baby, right? Do they come out hand first? No, they don't, right? And if a hand comes out, what follows?
Cesarean section.
The rest, yeah. Which is to say that that's the process to say the rest of the baby, right? The rest of the baby comes out, right? So again, look at the words that are used, right? And it's in some parts of this, right? It goes off and sits there and says, you know, this happened, and moreover, and it's just these things, these words are building on each other, right? It's the 2x4 moment. What's the point of the twin birth? What's the point of the younger over the older?
We see it commonly that the younger or a younger receives the blessing.
That's right.
And
It's
that's
God's
gonna
will.
help
I mean, it's God's will. He's overturning the cultural norms and saying, I'm choosing.
My choice.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's what he said to Rachel, right? This is my choice. Before either of the two kids were born, before they did anything, my choice is Jacob over Esau, right? He said, my choice is this son over the other son. Now, again, we get the same thing later on. The heir of Perez is who? David, right? 1 Samuel 16, at the beginning of that section, what happens with Samuel? He's walking down, he's examining all the kids. He's like, do you have any others?
Yeah.
Until he gets to what?
The youngest.
Yeah, in this case, the youngest, right? Scumbag youngest. Baby's always getting all the deals, right? Anyway. But this,
Bitter at all.
not bitter at all. Not bitter at all. So of course, this is the whole deal, right? All these parallelisms, right, start to then come together, right? Now we're going to look at the broad perspective. Then we're going to figure out what this chapter means. Okay. So again, parallelisms of the separation of one brother from the rest in the two stories came about that Judah went down from his brothers. Of course, right off the bat, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. His brothers said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? And then again, 28, moreover, it took place while she's giving birth. One hand was put out, midwife tied a scarlet thread to sit. This hand saying, this one came out first, right? But again, they're basically saying what? How can you be the one? You're the what? You're the runt of the litter, right? Again, God choosing the younger over the older, so his choice will stand, as Alan said, as opposed to the just sort of the natural order, right? And again, this was basically God sitting there demonstrating to Judah that I'm in control, right? Now, again, here's the parallelism we saw recognized, right? The very colored tunic. Please examine to see whether it's your sons or not. She says the same thing. Please examine and see. This tunic identifies Joseph. These things identify Judah, right? And again, we go off and sit there and say, examine, recognize, right? This is my son's tunic. Judah recognized them, blah, 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 right? And again, this has been used in deception, to John's point, right? This is not the first time we've seen this show up. Genesis 27:23, again, Isaac doesn't recognize Jacob, but again thinks he's who? Esau, right? All these same sort of things, right? What's interesting is later on in the narrative in Genesis 42 or so, when they're standing in front of their brother, what happens? They don't recognize him, right? And again, all this precision of this, right, is not some story just wedged in here. The point of all of this is to sit there and say Genesis chapter 38 is not something that's just, well, we had this story, we didn't know where to stick it. So let's just stick it right here, you know? Because again, why? It's too finely crafted. That's the point of this last 2 or 3 slides. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do I have consensus on this deal? So again, this is the thing. Judah himself has probably no clue what's been going on, right? Until he gets to this moment in time. And now the link between the kid that they dipped the blood in and the kid who asserts himself in some unusual way, right, starts to pull the whole business together for him and doesn't have an impact in his life. Well, again, as we keep thinking through this a little bit, there's been a lot of commentary on Genesis 38 over the years. Medieval Jewish commentators interpreted the location of the narrative with respect to the Joseph cycle as to clues to its purpose, right? And basically understood the placement after the sale of Joseph was due to the intense grief of Jacob, and as a result, the brothers held Judah responsible and drove him away. So his best friend now becomes this Adulamite because he can't hang out with what? The other 9, because they're like, well, you know why Dad hates us all? It's because of you, stupid. He's like, I'm not the one who said kill him, you know? Anyway. Another consideration is that it's to contrast Joseph's conduct with Potiphar's wife with that of Judah's conduct with Tamar, except that those two are not contrastable. Yes, it involves a guy and a girl, and that's about as far as the your comparisons go, right? But that's kind of weak sauce from that perspective. I'm going to skip over what Martin Luther said for time purposes, and modern scholarship kind of sees these 3 points, right? This story is meant to impress the duties of levirate marriage, which why I brought that up earlier. Again, the purpose is to explain the need for Jacob/Israel to leave Canaan, right? To remain would have risked assimilation. I think really is the point of the sons of the daughters of men and the sons of God back in the early part of Genesis chapter 6. Of course, Esau and Judah both end up marrying Canaanite women. And that marriage of a Canaanite woman is what infuriates Rachel, and we demonstrate Esau's lack of comprehension of what's going on, because he realizes he shouldn't have married a Canaanite woman, so he goes off and marries an Ishmaelite, which again is somebody else also outside the line of promise. I mean, the guy just is a 2-time loser. And then, of course, the contrast between Joseph and Judah, and by reference, Judah's brothers. And there's certainly a contrast there, but that's not, I don't think, the point of this whole deal. So what is the point? Well, again, if we go back to the Joseph cycle, we pick up the narrative where the brothers first visit Egypt and then encounter Joseph. And then what happens? When Joseph sees them for the first time, what does he accuse them of being? Thieves, spies, right? Blah, 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 right? And so he basically throws them all in the clink, and he sits there and says, y'all think about your crimes for a little while. And then he pulls them out, and he sits there and says, what? You're still thieves and spies, but, and they basically, throw out, they're divulging everything. And he says, just, okay, show me what you just said is true. Head on back, and I'll keep one of you. Pick Simon, right, Simeon. And then he sends them back and fills up their sacks, takes care of them. He's a nice guy after all, right? Sends them all back, and then what happens?
In the silver back in.
Not yet.
Not there yet?
Not yet. No silver yet, just food.
Because they had to bring back their youngest brother.
Had to bring back the youngest brother.
And then when he was sending them away, that's when he did.
So what happens with the youngest brother, right?
Jacob
didn't want to.
Yeah. So they come to Jacob, right? And they're starving, and Jacob sits there and says, "Well, you boys need to go back. It was good. That's good grain, by the way. And but I'm hungry, so go get some more grain." And the brother's like, "We can't, because we don't bring Benjamin. Isn't gonna happen." They starve for a little bit longer. Dad goes, "Go get him." And then they say to their father, said, "Hey, look, we can't go unless we go with Benjamin." And his father says, "What? You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And you would take Benjamin. All these things are against me." For a guy who was so large and in charge in the earlier sections, he is just very much a different individual in this point. Reuben says to his father, "You may put my 2 sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care, and I will return him to you." Anybody in here grandparents? You have your choice between your nutty kid or your grandkid. Who are you picking?
Grandkids all the way.
Yeah, exactly, right? I'm like, what grandfather is jumping at this? Especially Reuben, who's already what? On his dad's list, big time. I'm like, Reuben is like, nice job there, buddy. This is the whole thing about you sitting there saying Reuben wants to save his life. No, he doesn't. Reuben's interested in doing what? Saving his skin. If I can return the favorite son, what's going to happen? I get off of dad's list, from that perspective, right?
I don't think Reuben had a plan to return if he was unsuccessful.
In this case here?
Yes, and so you can have my 2 sons would have made sense because he wasn't coming back.
Well, I'm not sure about it. I think I see this as Reuben being clueless. When I was talking about Reuben coming back with Joseph, he was going, at the very beginning of chapter 37, he was going to somehow secretly steal Joseph out of the pit and return him to his father. See, I'm the good kid, right? And of course that fails. Reuben is just a clueless individual. And I would sit there and say, it tells us too that nothing's happened in his life that did what? That changed the trajectory. Okay? So now, after a bit of more starving, Judah finally speaks up. Notice the profound difference. Judah says to his father, Israel. Notice the name change too, right? "Send the lad with me. We will arise and go, that we may live and not die, we as well as you and our little ones." That's almost verbatim what Reuben goes off and says. But then he says something very different. He says what? "I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible for him." if I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, let me bear the blame before you forever. That's a very different statement than Reuben's, isn't it? Okay? I will be surety for the boy. Well, of course, we pick up the action, and in Genesis chapter 43, you guys will flip over there real quick here. How are we doing on time? Whoop, baby, we're doing great. We can just luxuriate in all this. Genesis chapter 43, 33, and 34. They return, and notice what happens. They were seated before him in order of age. The him is Joseph, from firstborn to the youngest. The men looked at each other in astonishment. What's the point of that little maneuver?
How did he know the oldest two?
Because later on, when the trap is sprung, the guard will sit there and say to the brothers, did you not know that my boss is essentially like a seer, a visionary, he's got extra special perceptions, blah, blah, blah. And they're going to be like, well, yeah, you're right, because somehow we were seated in our birth order. 34, portions were served to them from Joseph's table. Benjamin's portions was 5 times larger than any of theirs. They drank and they got intoxicated with Joseph, right? What's the point of the 5 times larger? He's like a hungry kid? Bestowing favoritism on him, right? Absolutely bestowing favoritism on him. What's different about this time? They do what they couldn't do before. They eat a meal in peace. All 12 of them for the first time. So, Genesis 44, the trap is set, right? Now we're getting into Bob's point. Fill the men's bag with as much food as they can carry, put their money on top of the bag, put my cup, my silver one, at the top of the youngest one's bag, along with his grain money, and they did as Joseph told them. They sent him off, and then in verse 4, they had not gone very far from the city when he said to his steward, get up, pursue the men, overtake them, and say to them, why have you paid evil for good? Isn't this the cup that my master drinks from, and uses for divination? What you have done is wrong. There's the trap, right? They overtake them. They said to him, why have you done these things, right? And they go off and they make this sort of a statement, right? I love this. Your servants couldn't possibly have done such a thing. We brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money we found last time.
So they have it first time too?
Well, it's their silver. I thought you meant the silver cup.
Oh.
Okay, you meant their cash.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, good. So you're correct. You get your gold star back. All right, now, he goes off and sits there and says, how could we steal gold and silver from your master's house? If any of us is found to have it, he must die. We also will become my lord's slaves. I mean, that's a bold statement. That's like, yeah, I'm all in on this. Because we know who we are, right? None of us did this vile deal, right? And then, of course, the steward does what? He modifies it. Notice what he says. What you have said is right, but only the one who is found to have it will be my slave. The rest of you will be blameless. Which, of course, is the point of all the way back to the multicolored tunic. We're blameless. It was some animal that killed him. So each one quickly lowers his sack to the ground. They open it up. They begin with the oldest, end with the youngest, and of course, the cup is found in Benjamin's sack. They can't believe it. They pile into the car and they head back to the city. Verse 14. When they reached Joseph's house, he was still there. They fell to the ground before him, and he said, what is this that you have done? Didn't you know that a man like me would uncover the truth by divination? Has he uncovered it? By divination. No. But that was, of course, the whole point of the setup of the youngest to the oldest, blah, blah, blah. Judah is the one who speaks for the brothers, not Reuben. What can we say to my Lord? How can we plead? How can we justify ourselves? God has exposed your servant's iniquity. We are now my Lord's slaves, both we and the one in whose possession the cup was found. Which goes back to the point of integrity. That's what the boys said when they were out there with the steward, right? Joseph said, I swear that I will not do this. The man in whose possession the cup was found will be my slave. The rest of you can go in peace to your father. Again, he's done what? Perfectly recreated the events of all those years ago, right? All you have to do to make everything good is what?
Throw your brother under the bus.
Throw your brother under the bus. Exactly right. First, build a bus. and then throw him under the bus. Verse 18. Notice this. Judah approached him and said, "Sir, please, let your servant speak personally to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, for you are like Pharaoh. My lord asked his servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we answered, my lord, and we said, 'We have an elderly father and a younger brother, the child of his old age. The boy's brother is dead. He is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him.'" Imagine those words coming from Judah's mouth.
Talking about me.
Right? Not talking about me.
Well,
Yeah, but he's talking about Joseph. Joseph's heart had to be racing, right? To hear this, because this is quite a confession, right? "Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him to me so I can see him.' He said to my lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he were to leave, his father would die.' Then you said to your servants, 'If your younger brother does not come down with you, you will not see me again.' This is what happened when we went back to your servant my father. We reported your words to him, but our father said, 'Go again, buy us some food.' We told him, 'We cannot go down unless our younger brother goes with us. So if our younger brother isn't with us, we cannot see the man. Your servant my father said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons, one left.' I said that he must have been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him again. If you also take this one from me, Benjamin, and anything happens to him, you will bring my gray hairs down to Sheol in sorrow." Now he moves it to the present. "So if I come to your servant, my father, the boy is not with us, his life is wrapped up with the boy's life. When he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. Then your servants will have brought the gray hairs of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in sorrow. Your servant became accountable." Now he's speaking to himself. "I became accountable to my father for the boy, saying, 'If I do not return him to you, I will always bear the guilt for sinning against you, my father,'" which is a different phrase than he used with his dad. "Now please let your servant, me, remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy. Let him go back to his brothers, for how can I go back to my father without the boy? I could not bear to see the grief that would overwhelm my father." What is that a perfect narrative description of? Substitutionary atonement. Why does Judah get the promise of the Messiah? It's that phrase right there.
Really to give up his life.
How can I go up to my father if the lad is not with me? At the end of the day, we're not good or bad. We don't have a good or bad problem, which is how the boys perceive things for a long time. What we have is we're a dead problem. God says, hey, like he says to Jesus says in John chapter 6, all the Father have given to me, I'm not going to lose any of them. The problem is he comes to earth, what does he find? It's a graveyard filled with dead people. We could just do what? Well, I went down there, Dad,
Too late.
idiots, they're all dead, too late. Or he could do what? My life or theirs. My life or theirs. It's no surprise to me Judah is the one who gets favored as the Messiah. So when we read at the end, Revelation, saw a lamb as if slain, and looked and behold, it was what? Lion from the lamb, from the tribe of Judah. Right? Stunning. Stunning. What's the difference? What is the difference? Judah the scumbag to Judah the Christological character.
Without the story of Tamar, you don't see Judah's change in heart.
That's exactly right. God acted in his life and met him where he was at and did what? Amazing things. How has God met you in your walk? Probably right where you're at. It's out there and said what? Something's got to change. And I hope it's not as dramatic as what Judah went through, but obviously it worked in Judah's case, right? From my perspective, this is what drives me nuts, is again, we have an opportunity with this story that we never hear from the pulpit to go off and say what? Just like right out of Genesis, it is not our covering but the one that he provides. It is not our self-righteousness, but his gift. It is not our fixing ourselves up, but his recreation, turning what was ruined and destroyed into what is beautiful, blessed, and perfect. It is not our strength, it is our need. That is the story of Genesis, from chapter 1 all the way to the end of chapter 50.
And so you had to get to the end of Genesis to be able to look back on everything that happened and ask yourself, was it worth it?
Yep.
You couldn't ask that question before then, because the answer would be no. This is horrible.
This is all going bad. And it just keeps going bad, right? I mean, what's worse than the fall? Everything that follows after is worse than the fall, right? It just keeps rolling downhill. And then you get to this moment and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, God has just done something unbelievable, something amazing, something you wouldn't even understand if you were told it, right? And how many of us have read through Genesis, I swear I'm going to read the Bible this year. We make it to the end of Genesis, right?
You make it all the way to Leviticus.
Yeah, he said it's like I'm skipping to Matthew.
I might be a little farther. I'm a better reader.
You skipped over to Judges. But again, this is the point, right? And so I hope that this is a chapter back in your book of Genesis, something exciting that you can think about. Because again, next time somebody, from my perspective, I think one of the applications is at the end of the day, we tend to look at it from this direction. The most screwed up person that I know of in my life, do I want to approach them? Yes, after they've done what? Sort of clean up their act a bit, right? I'm like, no, God meets us right where we are, in the middle of our mess. And if it's not messy enough to get our attention, he makes it worse. Because he loves us. And he's going to do something about it. Okay? Comments?
I don't think they understood it, and still don't, Israel, today, right? Without the Holy Spirit, they couldn't look back at the substitutionary atonement and understand that it was the Messiah, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the sad part of Isaiah chapter 6. God sends him out and says, I want you to talk to people who can't hear. I want you to show them something and they can't see. Which is the case of anybody who's dead, right? So, again, you have various people. Paul Hahn always likes to ask this question of anybody, coming into the board. He says, what comes first, faith or regeneration? For me, it's pretty easy. Dead people can't believe. Have to be made alive first. And that's his process, right? So again, without the Spirit, without the enabling of the Spirit, all this just sounds like story, and that's it. History at best, yeah, exactly.
I just find it encouraging that God can take the most dysfunctional families and turn it into something good.
Yeah, exactly right. Because I come into this life with Christ more from a Judah perspective than a Joseph perspective, right? And so I think what happens to us then is, again, we tend to therefore reinforce, well, you need to be more like Joseph so God can love you. That's clearly not the case with Judah, right? He loves him enough that he did everything he did to basically do what? Win him back to the path.
It was quite something how the brothers all of a sudden find out who Joseph really is, the next chapter.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, the whole story is excellent, right?
How can this be?
Yeah, because
he forecasted this was going to take place.
Yeah.
You're going to bow down before me, and they sure did.
Well, I know, and I think that's sad too, because the brothers, Joseph relates the thing. He sits there and says, all the stars, and the brothers are like going, there are 12 stars, stupid. 11 of you are also what? Stars, right? I mean, they're like, they sort of miss the point that they're in the pantheon of the constellations, but Joseph is the number one. They're like, I can't live with that. So none of us will be stars. Okay, that's clever. Really? It's funny how we are as human beings.
I think it really is significant that if you're, I mean, the first people reading Genesis already know in terms of like, Moses writes it. And so some of it's reflecting after. But there's sort of this messianic expectation in Genesis, as you're talking about the seed going back in Genesis 3, where's the blessing going?
Yeah.
As you're reading it, where's the blessing going? And you think Joseph seems like the right fit. Joseph's going to get the blessing. There you go. The scepter will not depart from Judah.
Just was waiting.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So all of a sudden it's like, aha, the seed goes to Judah.
Yeah.
It doesn't go to Joseph. And I actually think that's a really cool segue into the Minor Prophets. I was glad that you chose this one, because now as we go into the Minor Prophets and we're looking at Israel and Judah, I mean, there's, and one thing that's kind of interesting, you have the Toledot all the way through, and then how does the book of Matthew start? This is the book of the generations of Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
And a genealogy.
Yep.
Where's the seed?
It's all the way back.
Here it is.
Along with that, because of this episode, going back to the Tamar episode, Jesus doesn't have, at least at that point, a Canaanite. So Judah's, it doesn't say that Tamar is a Canaanite, so assume she's an Israelite, right?
We don't know.
Yeah. But she's not a Canaanite.
No, she has a name.
She's not identified.
But at least she gets a name, right? They do it in the honor of giving her a
That is
name.
rejecting his first wife, who was a Canaanite, and her descendants.
Yep. Yep.
But I'd like to add too, this, I wonder if these words rattled around in Jesus' head when he was on earth. Because when Judah says to his father, I myself will be a surety for him, you may hold me responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame before you forever. Did Jesus take on that role as the seed and say, I'm going to save them?
Yeah.
And if I don't, then hold me responsible.
Yeah, exactly. I absolutely think that's the case. Absolutely think that's the case. And so again, from my perspective too, we always, you hear this debate about, I like the God of the New Testament more so than the God of the Old Testament, right? Kind of garbage, right? I'm like, no, this is the God of the Old Testament right here. Who's doing what? He's setting up to be the God of the New Testament, right? Who is the same God, by the way, right? Because again, it's not, everything starts in Genesis. I don't have to get to the Gospels. And again, you wonder if some of this stuff isn't what they're debating as they're walking down the road to Emmaus. I would love to hear Jesus sit there and go through this story, right? I'd be like, I'd probably cry, but anyway, it'd be so cool, right? Because again, you're just like, the points are obvious.
I know we probably need to close, but I was actually pondering this week, like, why did God choose Solomon? Like, that came through Bathsheba. Out of all David's sons, that was the one God chose. But again, that's the one where God showed his redemption, like showed the story of God being the one in control.
Yep, that's exactly right. Exactly right. Which is why why Nebuchadnezzar can sit there and say, God places over men the lowliest of people. Because again, it's, we have as our leaders, the choices that God has put in place, right? And it drives me nuts because I'm like going, seriously? There are a lot of other people out there that would have been better.
Can I explain Joe Biden?
Yeah, exactly. Then what's his bucket or what's your bucket? Pick your ruler in history, right? But it's because God is doing what? It's his story.
It's his story, right?
Yeah.
His prophecy.
Yep.
With Joseph being the second in command. That was, to me, as we apply that to today, that's the final answer.
Yeah.
We're not in control of who's the president. We're not in control of the politics. And I think that's why Jesus avoided it. I mean, the Roman control during his time, no insurrection. He didn't shake his fist at those guys.
Yeah, because that's not the battle.
That's not.
Plus they built that road system so the gospel could spread.
That's right. That's exactly right. We could have had that whole argument. In fact, if we'd done the wedding in Cana, we would have talked about the Roman road situation. Because again, he comes at a specific time and place that is designed almost intentionally to do what? Spread the word. Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, thank you guys. I'm sorry. You?
I was just going to say, building on what you said about Solomon, I immediately was thinking of Psalm 51, and David's prayer after Bathsheba is, blot out my rebellion, wash me from my guilt, cleanse me from my sin. I'm conscious of my rebellion, my sin is ever before you. And it's a psalm of repentance, and it's so in the same way that Judah's encounter with Tamar, he says, she's more righteous than I am.
Yeah.
In David's encounter with Nathan and Bathsheba, it's like,
yeah.
And so then it's like, well, naturally, like, of course it's Solomon. In retrospect, like, yeah, because Solomon, that is what produced the psalm that points to the Savior. You know, it's all.
Yeah, it's amazing. It all ties together somehow, doesn't it? Right? Which is why I think too, for me, my point of one of the little throwaways of Genesis is that Toledo, right? The writers of these books, inspired by the Holy Spirit, give us structure. When you see something, it's there for a reason. If you don't understand it, then it just means what? Study more. You know, ask for more prayer. You need something, man?
She's gonna come and grab the DVD player.
You can have the whole thing.
I just want the DVD.
All right, great. Mom, will you, after she grabs the DVD player, will you pray and send us on our way? Or pray for her as she's working on this.
Our Father, we just praise you and thank you for this great study in Genesis. We pray that you will make it alive in our lives today and every day you give us to be able to serve you. We pray for the Wilsons and get them healthy, and pray that it won't be anything serious, and we just look forward to being back with you again next week. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.